Hi, in this tutorial I provide you essential guide on OAuth2 with Spring Boot and Spring Security, and you will learn all you need to know about OAuth2 from beginner level to advanced. Okay, so what is OAuth2? OAuth2 means Open Authorization Latest version 2.0 as the name implies. Auth is an open standard for access delegation commonly used as a way of internet users to grant website or application access to their information on other websites but without giving them the password. So let's see how OAuth2 works. First, let's consider a user management without OAuth2. So this is the user management without OAuth2. As you see, we have the user, and the user have 3 apps which he uses. In an organization where you use 3 apps and you have to log each app with different username and password, sometimes it may be challenging to know all these passwords. Sometimes you may forget. So this is the user management without OAuth2. So each app independently manage users. So let's see how user management with OAuth2 look like. So here it is, user management with OAuth2. So here we have a user where he uses 3 apps, but in this case the app uses the authorization server. So now the user have to log with a single password. The authorization server manages the user and the password, the authentication. So this is the user management with OAuth2. And then OAuth2 have components. So what are the components of OAuth2? The main component of OAuth2, we have the user. The user is the resource owner, and we have the client. The client is the app that works on behalf of the user. So we also have authorization server which authenticate the user, and we also have the resource server. The resource server is where the resource for the user is kept. And we have grant types. Grant types is the way you can access your resources, the way provided for resource access, that they are called grant types. We have authorization code. These are the common grant type. Authorization code, we have password, refresh token, we have client, credential. So we will going to look each this in step by step. So here we have authorization code, grant type, we have user, client, and then we have authorization server and the resource server. Here the user want to access the resource first. He tell the client should tell the Auth server. So Auth server, I want to access my resource. He will provide his credential to the Auth server, and then the Auth server will tell the client that he is allowed. So the client will request his token. Give me a token. So here is a token, because he have to provide the token to the resource server before he get the resource. So if the resource server check for the token that he get from the authorization server, if the token is valid, then he will be able to access his resource. So this is the authorization code grant type. And let's check for the password grant type. In the password grant type, you have a user, client, authorization server, and the resource server as well. And in this case, the client accesses request for the token on behalf of the user. So the client has access to the user credential. All he need to do, first, I want to access my resource. Then the client will tell the authorization server that Ali, you want to access his resource. Here is the credential. He will give the credential of the user to the authorization server. Okay, once given this, then if it is valid, he will get the token as well. So after getting the token, he will provide it to the resource server. and when the token is valid, the resource server will give the resource to the client. Okay, so let's check the next. We have client credential grant type. In this case, the client access the resource on behalf of the user, and so we have this only client without the user. There are endpoints which maybe the client may want to access on behalf of the user. So here I need to access resource on behalf of a user. Here are my client credential. So he will provide his client credential in exchange for a token. If it is valid, then the authorization server will give the token, and he will provide the token to the resource server. If the token is valid, then he will get access to the resource. So the last thing we have is the refresh token. So in the refresh token grant type, when the user here we have client and the resource server, we have the authorization server here in the middle. So let's see how it works. I need to access Aliyu's account. Here is my access token. Then we will have 4 or 3 forbidden your token is expired. That is when the token is expired. So I need new access token. Here is my refresh token. So the client token to the authorization server. So here is new access token if the refresh token is valid. And when he is giving the token, the last thing is that he will provide the token to the resource server. When it is valid, then we will have the 200. Okay, so here is our resource. So these are grant type, and so the next thing we will do is that we will have the authorization server from a third party. We will have this, and later we will implement our own authorization server. In this case, I will be using GitHub, and you will see how the Auth2 works, the magic behind Auth2. So let's do this together. So in this section, we will set up our application in GitHub because we will be using GitHub as the authorization server. If you want, you will use Facebook or Google or any other authorization server that you want. In this case, we will be using GitHub. So we need to set up the application in the GitHub and provide detail about our application which we will create. So here in this file, I have this link, and this link we will use this link to create the new application setting in GitHub, and I will provide this in the description of this video below this video. If you access my repository of this project, you will have access to all this file. Okay, now let's go to the browser, paste this, then here is where it takes us to. We'll create the application name. We will add the application name, homepage URL, and authorization callback URL. Authorization callback URL is the URL which the authorization server will call our app. Okay, now let's add the coding techniques. I will use coding techniques. The homepage URL, I will use the home, this part which we will create later in the controller, and then the authorization callback URL, I will use the base URL in which it will use this URL. Authorization server will use this URL to call our app. Okay, now we finish adding this thing. Then let's click on register application. Okay, after registering application, you see the generated client ID. So this is our client credential. We will click here to generate new client secret. So now you see we have client secret. So before, let's copy this and keep in the file, so for later use we will use this later. This is our client ID, and then let me write the client secret. We will show it below this. Okay, now let's go back to the, so let's click here to copy the client secret. This is our client credential, and this credential you will not expose this, and this credential I am using now, you will not have access to this because I will delete this. This is only for the purpose of this tutorial. Okay, so let's go and store this here, so we will use this later in our app. So now the next thing we will do, let's go back to the GitHub. If you want, you will add the logo of your app. That is, when you go to the login page of the GitHub, you will see your logo telling the user continue as to what is your name, then continue to the app. It will provide this logo. So here I will not add logo. Then that is all we need. So the next thing we will do is we will create new Spring Boot project for this. Okay, let's do this together. So now let's create a new project, so for the OAuth2 apps here in the Spring STS. So create project, and then here is Spring Starter project. So click next. Okay, so we will change this. This is the previous tutorial and it kept this name. So in this case I will use OAuth2 app as the name of our application, and I will use these coding techniques as the group. I will leave this as the name of the package, and what we will do next is the description. So let me write OAuth2 tutorial. So, and then we will be using Marvin Java version. Here is 17, packaging Java, and the language here is Java. Okay, so let's click next and add the dependency. I need the Spring Web dependency face on. So let's click this, and then the next thing I need Spring Boot DevTool for the live reload, and then we need the Spring Security. So on what we will check next is the OAuth2 client. OAuth2 client. Later in the application we will implement our own authorization server, so we need the authorization server dependency. So here we have all this, and what we will do is click finish. We finish adding our dependency. So let's finish this. So import getting started, as you see here is our app. Okay, so the next thing we will do is we will start writing the configuration for the OAuth2. So here is our just initialize project, and here is the starter class. Now we will create a package configuration where we will add OAuth2 configuration for this app. Now let's create new package configuration. Okay, finish. Inside this we will add new class OAuth2 config. OAuth2 config. Okay, then click finish. And in this class we will annotate this class with @configuration. So here it is. So first of all, we need to provide the detail about the client, including the client credential to the client registration. Okay, so later we will provide a bin of client registration repository. Let's start by adding this step by step. Here, private, we will use this class client registration. So client registration, we will use this client registration class to access the members of this class, which are static members. Here we have with registration ID. With registration ID, we will provide GitHub. There are two ways of adding this configuration. First, I will show you the first way which you will use, and later we will also use the common Auth2 provider, since that GitHub is part of the common Auth2 provider, which is the class provided by the Spring Security that handle this. But let's add this phase. We have with registration ID GitHub, and then we will access the client with client ID. So with client ID, here we will provide our client ID, so we store it here. Let's copy this and then paste. So the next thing is we will add the client secret as well. Okay, so and we will also copy this as well, add it here. So and then we need a client authentication method. Client authentication method. So this is the method in which we authenticate the client, or in which we will authenticate the client. So there is a class client authentication method, which we will access the members of this class, and so it is accessing the members. So we have client secret basic, and we also have client secret JWT. Then we will set it to none as well if we want. That depending the way we want to authenticate the client. So we will use the client secret basic, which we will use to authenticate the client with ID and secret. So let's access this. And the next thing, we will also add scope. Scope are like granted authorities, and in this case I will set it to read. So and we also have authorization URL, so this is, we will provide the GitHub authorization URL in which the user will be authorized. So to do this, here in the same file we have this link. So if we access this link, we will see the provided URL for the GitHub. So let's open another tab, paste this. So if we scroll down, we have this link, https GitHub. Okay, so let's copy this and add it to our method authorization URL. Then we also need a token URL, that is in the URL in which we will get the access token. So the access token, we need to have the access token and provide it to the resource server so that we can have our resource. And let's go back to the GitHub as well. If we scroll, so here is the URL again, we have this. As you can see below, we have the parameter. Later in the tutorial, you will see how we will use this parameter to get the access token when we implement our own authorization server, as well as this. Okay, for now, let's add this URL. So, and the next thing we will add is we need user info URL, in which the application will get the information about the user. So again, if we let's scroll down, you see we have this as well. So let's copy this, go back to the app and then paste this. So for the user, the next thing, we also need the user name attribute name. So in this case, I will set this to ID, whatever the ID of the user in the GitHub, so it will use as the attribute name, username attribute name. So let's go next. We will add the client name. So the client name here I will add is coding techniques. So here is this, and what we will do next is that we will add the authorization grant type. In the beginning of this tutorial, we discussed about the authorization grant type. So let's add, we have this authorization grant type, and we will access this using the method. We will have those methods. Let's try to access again. So we will be using authorization code. We have client credential, we have refresh token, we have password, JWT, bearer, and device code. But let me choose the authorization code. So the last thing we will add is that redirect URL. So let's add this. First we will add the base URL. This will be handled automatically. Base URL, and then followed by the login, followed by OAuth2, followed by code, then registration ID, which is the GitHub. So we have registration ID, okay. So the next thing we will do, we finish with this, just we will build. So the second one I will show you how to set is very simple. We will not add all this because all the common OAuth2 that server that we have, it provided in the class that I will show you later. So but for now, you have to know this, because in the case of not common, which is the authorization servers that are not common, which is not provided by the Spring Security, you have to add it yourself. Okay, so if we return this, the next thing, in the authentication filter, will use the client ID and client secret. It have to know about the client. So how will that be possible? So we need a client registration repository bin. So and the bin will provide the client to the authentication filter, and it will find the client by ID. So we may have different client, so it will be able to find out this client that is trying to authenticate. So now let's provide this method, client registration repository public client registration repository. Okay, So client registration repository, and then we have in-memory client registration repository. In-memory client registration repository is like in-memory user details manager, and if you want you will store it in the database, but now we will be using in-memory client registration repository. So here is the class, and we have this also with parameter where we can pass a list of client, but in this case we are having only one class. Let's add this, followed by if we add this client. So here is the client, and for this we finish with this. And the last thing we will do is we can have another bin. So this bin is for the security filter, and we will add OAuth2 login. So let's add a bin. Okay, we need add bin of security filter. Okay, so public security filter chain, and then we will pass the parameter of the HTTP security. Okay, so using HTTP dot we will access the members. So here we will access the OAuth2 login. OAuth2 login, and in this case we will have the authorization success URL, which is the home. Okay, so we have to, let me access this again. Okay, we have success, default success URL, and let me pass the home. So this will throw an exception. Let's add the throws, and then the last thing we will authenticate all the path. So authorize request, here is the authorized HTTP request. Let's set this to out without any request. We need to access a method any request authenticated. We are authenticating all the requests. So let's return the HTTP bulid. So, and then close this as well. We will return this, okay. This is all for the configuration class, and I said that after trying this I will show you another way of adding the client for the GitHub. So now let's add the controller for and add the home path. So new package for the controller, finish new class. controller, or let me add as home controller. So this will be like this. Then click finish, and so the class it is providing the class. We will annotate this class with @raise pons @raise controller, okay, so that it will return a text home. You need to return just a text home public string. Let's add the home at get mapping. So the path will be home like this, and then public string home. That is the method that will return a home. So after successful authentication, it will take us to this. So we have all this in place. The next thing we will do is to launch the app. Okay, let's do this. Let's run the our OAuth2 app and then try to access a path. So our program is running. Let me, okay, you see the program is running, and after it complete we will test the app. So it started on the default port 8080. Okay, now let's go to the browser, open new tab, let's add 6 localhost home. So now it will take us to the top, so that we will be authorized. The page is not redirecting properly. Let's check our code. So we have error. Let's check this. Map has no value for registration ID. So let's go back to the auth config. Okay, so this is where we have an error. This is supposed to be small and not a big. Registration ID as written is written like this. Okay, now let's rerun the program and try to access the home path. Okay, so it is running again. Despite having dev tool, I just forget I run the application. So saving is enough. Port was already in use. Let me stop the app and then rerun. Okay, now it is running. So the app is running still. Okay, now it started. So let's go back again and then try to access the home path. Okay, you see we have the authorized to coding techniques, and if we click on the authorized Aliyu Sahabu Adam, it will take us to the home path. As you see here, this is if we have added the logo, you will see the logo here. So now if we set how to authorize, then it will take us to the home. You see we have this. Okay, now if I log out, let me log out. So sign out. sign out. So let's try to log the user out here as well. So now if we try to access the home part, it will take us to the login page. That is because I log in, it show us continue as Aliyu. So you see it take us to the sign in to GitHub to continue to coding techniques. Now if you add it, okay, then I add the password. So let's try to access. You see it take us to the home as well. So the common Auth2 provider, which is the last thing that I will show you, is let us write the code. So now it is not responding, but for a second we will have it normal, and then try the common Auth2 provider for the GitHub. Okay, so now let's comment out this. Okay, so now but with writing as the common Auth2 provider is as simple, and it will save you a time. Now let's add common Auth2 provider. You see we have this class. Okay, then let's add the GitHub. As you see, we have Facebook, GitHub, Google, Okta, all as the common Auth2 provider. We will choose GitHub, and we find the get builder. We will access the get builder. Okay, so now here in the get builder we will pass the GitHub. So GitHub. So the only thing we will add now is the client credential. That is all. Then we will call the build method client ID face. Here is our client ID. So we have this here, and then add the client secret. So with the client secret as well, we add, okay, let's add the client secret here. So and then call the build method. That is all. This one, the same thing as this, all the detail it will provide automatically. But if you have to handle the authorization server that has it is not common, you will not use this method, you will use this one. Okay, now this is all we need to have for now, and then the next thing we will do in this tutorial is to implement our own authorization server and test all the grant type that we have that I showed you earlier. Implement our own authorization server, manage the user from our own app. So we will build this together. I will get rid of this class, so I will delete this class. I will provide in the below this video, you will find the URL to my GitHub repository where you will find all this. Now for now, let us delete this and start having configuration for our server. Okay, so let's delete this. Okay, so now let's create a new class, OAuth2 server config OAuth to server config. Okay, then so we will annotate this class with add configuration. Okay, so here we will have a client who registered on our app. So we will provide this using the registered client class, which is different from the first class that we use, client registration. In this case, we have registered client. Okay, so we have these, and then let's use this to access. We will provide the ID of the client. In this case, I will use unique identifier UUID, generate a random number to string, because this method will receive a string. And then we will have the client ID. In the last section, GitHub generated this for us, but we have to generate it for our client. So for this tutorial, I will just use the client as the client. And in the real world, you have to generate all these, like how the GitHub generated it for us. Okay, so let's have client secret as well. Okay, let's pass the client secret as secret, and then we will also have the client authentication method. We said this earlier. Client authentication method, we access the client secret basic, and then we also need the authorization grant type. We also use this earlier, authorization grant type. I will use the authorization code. So the redirect URL, here I will use the spring.io as the redirect. So spring.io. if you want, you will change it to the website you need, and if you have the authorization server, so you will configure this. Now let add the io, spring.io. okay, so the scope, as I said earlier, is like granted authorities, and I will set for this client to read. And then we also have the client settings. So these include the setting. Let's try to access the members, and you will see you will use this to add additional. It have builder additional settings to the client. As you see here, I will use the authorization, required authorization consent. So it will inform that the client is trying to access your resources. So if we set this to false, then it will not inform, it will just access directly. So let's call build. So we have this, and then let's call the build method. So we will return, let's return this. Okay, so we finished building the registered client, and we will use, let's set this to private because it is only accessible inside this class. And then let's have the bin admin of public registered client repository, registered client repository, So on return, so we will also pass this to in-memory registered client repository. First, let's have new in-memory registered client repository. So it is searching itself repository. We have this. Then let access. Okay, we have our registered. So we expose this bin, and that is all that we have here. And as I stated earlier, in the authentication filter, the authentication filter may need the credential, so it will intercept the request, and it may need the client credential, and it need to know about the client. So using the registered client repository, it will find the client using ID. So, and here is our client. So the next thing we will do is to have the security filter. In this case, we will have two security filters. The first one is for the which is normal security filter, and we also have the authorization server security filter. And in the we have to set the order of these filters. Okay, so for this one, let's have bin at order. We will set this to 1, and the next bin we will set it to 2. Okay, so let's have public security filter chain, followed by, for this one is the authorization server security filter chain. So we will add the HTTP security as the parameter. Okay, so first, what we need to do here, we need to call the OAuth2 authorization server configuration. So let's do this. We have OAuth2 authorization server configuration, and applied the default security on the HTTP using the method applied default security. Okay, and this will throw, we will add the throws to the declaration. Will throw an exception, may throw an exception. So we need http security.getConfigurer. so where is this get configurer? We have this, and then we will pass the OAuth2 authorization configurer dot class. So in this case, when the client authentication failed, it will redirect to the login point, login URL. So we need to provide this. We have to use the HTTP security method dot exception handling. So let me just add the variable as e. Okay, lambda variable e dot. So we will pass the default authentication entry point. So default authentication entry point, default authentication entry point. So here we will pass the default authentication entry point, and let's break this down. For the first one, I will pass new login URL authentication entry point, and we will pass the path to the login. So, and for the second one, we will pass new media type request matcher, which is HTML. New media type request matcher. So we have HTML media type and let's pass text.html. Okay, so on what we will do, let's break this so that you can see it on. Okay, that is all we need in this authorization server security filter, and then we will return http build http security. So supposed to be here, http security.build. Okay, this is all for this one, and then let's check out return statement. This will return http security build. Okay, if we have failed accessing using the client, then here we will access using the login, which we will provide as a callback. Okay, so the next thing we have to do here is that we will add a last bin, which is authorization server setting. The bin contain all the URL for the OAuth2. So add bin public authorization server settings, authorization server setting, return authorization server setting dot builder. By calling this builder, you will access the method. If you want, you will change the implementation, but I am using the default implemented by the Spring Security. Okay, so you'll see we have token revocation endpoint, token endpoint on OIDC, which is OpenID, and all this. So I will just call build, so that it is. We finish with this class, and the next thing we will add the user. So the user is part of the app. Okay, so we have to add the user. Now let's do this next. Okay, now we will create a new class security config, which we will add some other security configuration that we have for this app. Okay, so not new package inside the configuration, new class security config, and click finish. So let's notate this with add configuration. So the first thing, we will add the user detail service for user management public. So public user detail service, and then so we will use in-memory user details manager. In this case, let's have user detail user, and then equal to, we will use the user class of user details, with this provided by the Spring Security, and with username, let me provide my name as the username, and then let accesses the password. I will be using plain text 1 2 3 4. So if I don't want to define the password encoder bin, I will just add nope here, which represents the no-op password encoder. So without having another bin of the password encoder, this is enough. I will add the authority as well. Let me just have read here, then build. So this we will return new in-memory user details manager, in-memory user details manager. So we will pass the user here, and that is all for this. Okay, so let's go to the last thing we need to do. So we add another bin here and set the order. Since this one, the other one that we have in the order class, we set it to order 1, this will be order 2. Okay, so public security filter chain, I will name this default security filter chain, default security filter chain. So I will pass the HTTP security as well here, HTTP. So here we will use the form login. So let add http.form login. We'll use the default implementation provided by the Spring Security. Okay, so let use customizer, and then access with default. Okay, so if you need, you will configure this and add a new login. I have the tutorial for this, which is admin and user login, okay, and registration. So you will check this on the channel, and for this one is okay. So we need HTTP authorize, which we will authenticate the endpoint. HTTP authorize request. So and the authorized request will pass the lambda variable and authenticate all the endpoint requests. So request, okay, request dot any request authenticated. We will authenticate all requests. So this will throw an exception. Let add to throws declaration, and then return HTTP build, return HTTP build. We finish with this as well. So and what we will add in the next is that the JWT decoder and the key source for the access checking. So let's do this together next. So now the last thing we will do is to have a bin of JWT decoder, and we have to export some keys which will be used, a pair of keys which will be used for signing and verifying the JWT. As you know, the access token that we have is not just a plain text. So now let's do this. First we need to have the class private static of key pair, which will generate key pair and return it. So generate key pair. So let's use this name, and here we will use the key pair generator class. Okay, so let's have the key pair instance, and we will return this later. So we will have a try catch, so that we will have exception of illegal state exception or illegal algorithm exception. So I will go with the illegal state exception through new illegal state exception. So when generating these, we may have, okay, so let's continue with the key pair generator. So we will use the key pair generator here, key pair generator, and initialize it with the instance of RSA key. Okay, so key pair generator dot get instance. Here we will pass the algorithm that we will use, which is RSA. Okay, so and we will set the size of the key using, let's add this key pair. So generator dot initialize. So we will initialize with the type size of 2048 bit. Okay, and then we will use this variable that we have and set the value of the generated key on this variable. So equal to key pair generator dot generate key pair. So this is what we have. And the last thing we will do is to return the key pair. So okay, and this is what we will have to generate cryptographic key pair, and we will use this and on the RSA, so and expose a set of keys, and the key will be public and private. So let's define a bin that will use this method that we have. This method will generate a key pair. Okay, now let's have add bin public JWK source, and we will pass we will pass a generic of security context, and then we will pass JWK source. Okay, so first let's call the method that generate the key pair on this variable again. So generate key pair like this. We have this. Okay, so let's use the RSA. We have the RSA public key. we will first generate the public key. Okay, equal to, let's have kpa.get public. Okay, by doing so we will get the public key and then map this to the rs, or cast this to the rs public key. The same thing with when generating the private. Okay, so RSA private key. Okay, and name is the private key equal to, we call the kpa dot get private. So as well we will also map this to the add cast to private. Okay, and what we will do next is to generate a key pair of private, a RSA key of private key and public key. Okay, let's generate this key, RSA key. So RSA key, using this we will build the key RSA key. Okay, and then we'll use new RSA key builder. Okay, dot builder. So we have this. First we will pass the key here, public key, and we will also pass the private key as well, private key. So and then we need to pass the key ID. Okay, we will pass the key ID here to identify the key, each key that is generated, or each key that we will have when making a request. UID, we will use the random, okay, dot to string. So on we will call the build method. So this is what we have so far, and we will expose the key using the set jwk set. Okay, let's use jwk set, jwk set equal to new jwk set. Okay, we will pass our key here, and the last thing we will do, we will expose this key using the immutable jwk set so that it cannot be altered. Okay, new immutable jwk set. Okay, jwk set. Okay, so that is all. We finish with this one, and the last thing we will do here is to have the JWT decoder, and that is all we need. So this will be okay. Let's reduce this. Okay, that is all here, and let me have the admin here for the JWT decoder. This will decode the JWT public JWT decoder, JWT decoder. Then it will receive this as parameter, which is the JWK source. Okay, let's pass this. Okay, so now this will return the OAuth2 authorization server configuration decoder, OAuth2 authorization server configuration .jwt decoder. We pass this. Okay, we finished this implementation, and that is the end of this class that we are building. Okay, so let's add at enable security, enable web security. So we finish this. The last thing we will do is to test our application. Okay, let's do this together. Now that we finished building our authorization server, let's run the application to see if it is working and as expected. Okay, let's run the application. So the application is running. Okay, before it's finished running, let's check the URL in which we will make a request. So here is this URL. I will provide a link below this video where you can have access to this file in my repository. So we have this URL and it is already part of the authorization server setting bin that we have built in the authorization server config class. Okay, so let me show you the authorization server bin that we have built. Okay, so we have this. Okay, so let's go back to the URL again. We have the response type, okay, which we expect a code here, and then client ID, we set it to our client that we have as the same thing as client secret. So we have scope, which we set it to read. Okay, this is what we will have to make a request. So let's copy this and test. Now that our application, let's check, so it finished running. So let's go to the browser and paste this. Okay, these are the parameters that we have with this request. Okay, now let's click OK. So it takes us to the login page. So let's have the user Aliyu and 1234. So here we have client want to access your account. The following permission are requested by the above app. So if we consider here, we have, let's check, here we have client setting builder, which we set the required authorization consent to true. Okay, now let's click on read and then submit consent. So it redirects us to the spring.io as we expected, and here is the code that we have, and we use this code to have an access token in the Postman if you want to have the access token, or if you want to see the access token, and I will show you how to do this. So now that our application is working, now let's try to see the access token using the Postman with the code above. So let's copy the code. Okay, so the code started from here and end here. Okay, so let's copy this code, and after we copy the code, so before then we will go back to the client secret. So there is the encoder that is using the secret, but I want to choose the knob, which is no op password encoder, as a plain text before using the code to access the token. So let's run the application phase again and have another token, since that we have some modification. Okay, so the application here is running. Okay, now the application started. So let's try and have copy the URL and paste it again, which is authorization URL. So okay, so required consent, submit. Okay, So here is the new code that we will be using now. So let's copy this, then go to the postman. Here to have this, we will use the localhost 8080 or 2 token. Okay, we will use this URL, which is the token URL. This is also part of the authorization server setting. And here in the authorization, we will set the basic auth to client and the password as secret. So we will use this as a login basic auth. Okay, then the next thing we will do is go to the body, to the xform URL. Okay, so now we will have our grant type. So as said, it will use the authorization grant type or authorization code grant type. Okay, so we have to set the scope as well, which is part of the query scope. We set it to read, and then so the code that we just copy. So let's paste this code. You see we have this, and make sure you check this as post. Okay, now let's click send. So you see we have the access token, the scope is read, token type PRR, we have the expire in 299. Okay, so this is what we have so far. The same thing, the same procedure but different parameter. We have it the other grant type, which is the password and the client credential. Okay, so this is what we have built so far, and this is the end of this tutorial, and I hope you will subscribe this channel for more videos on Spring and other framework. Thank you for watching.